It began as a story about a perfect family. It ended as one of the darkest betrayals in American history, and the monster behind it smiled the entire time. The sun rose quietly over Frederick, Colorado, on August 13th, 2018, glowing softly over the peaceful cul-de-sac where Shanann Watts lived with her daughters, Bella and Celeste, unaware that the house behind the white garage door was moments away from becoming a crime scene that would horrify the world. Inside that house, Chris Watts, the man everyone thought was gentle, devoted and harmless, stood alone, already knowing that his wife and children would never leave alive. Outwardly, Chris had always seemed like the quiet, dependable type. A man who played with his girls in the driveway, who mowed the lawn, who posed for family photos with a shy smile, hiding every trace of the person he really was. Shanann, energetic and expressive, filled her social media with videos of the girls singing to their daddy, clips of family dinners, and hopeful messages about the unborn son she carried, a boy they planned to name Nico. But beneath the curated image of a thriving young family, the marriage was collapsing under the weight of secrets Chris had been hiding for months. He had emotionally checked out, losing weight, working out obsessively, finding excuses to stay away from home, while Shanann confided to friends that her husband no longer touched her, no longer looked at her, no longer cared. What she didn't know was that Chris had met someone at work, Nicole Kessinger, and began imagining a new life without the family he had built, a fantasy that quickly twisted into something dark and violent. The night before the murders, Shanann flew home from a business trip, exhausted but hopeful, still believing the man waiting in their bedroom could be saved if she fought hard enough. But Chris wasn't thinking of reconciliation. He was rehearsing erasure. When Shanann entered the bedroom around 2 a.m., Chris pretended to sleep beside her, knowing he would kill her before sunrise, knowing the daughters sleeping down the hallway would not survive the day. By morning, Shanann was dead, strangled in what Chris later called a moment of rage, though every action he took afterward exposed a plan far colder and far more deliberate. He wrapped her body in a bedsheet, dragging her down the stairs while her 4-year-old daughter Bella stood watching, clutching a pink blanket, asking softly, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris didn't answer. He loaded Shanann's body into the back of his truck and lifted both girls, still alive, still trusting him, into the back seat beside their mother's corpse, beginning the most horrifying drive in Colorado's history. For nearly an hour, Chris drove toward a remote oil site, while Bella and Celeste sat next to the sheeted body of their mother, asking questions Chris refused to acknowledge, each mile bringing them closer to their execution. At the site, Chris buried Shanann in a shallow grave, then turned toward his daughters, who watched him with confusion, not fear, until they realized he wasn't done. He smothered Celeste first, using her own blanket, then returned for Bella, who fought harder than her age should have allowed, kicking at him, pleading through tears, "Daddy, no." Her final breath would haunt every detective who touched the case. When it was done, Chris forced their small bodies through the narrow openings of 2 oil tanks, the crude oil swallowing them in silence as if to help him erase what he had done. Then he drove home, showered, sent Shanann a text pretending she was still alive, and staged a performance of concern for police, neighbors, and news cameras. But the mask was already slipping. Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson refused to accept Chris's calm explanations and demanded the police enter the home, her fear rising with every detail. Shanann's purse still in the house, her phone on the couch, her car in the garage with the car seats still inside. Nothing pointed to a woman who had simply walked away. Everything pointed to a man who had something to hide. Neighbor Nate Trinastich showed officers his surveillance footage, revealing Chris backing his truck into the garage at dawn and loading it for minutes, long, fast, frantic trips back and forth. And when Chris left the room, the neighbor turned to the officer and whispered, "He's not acting right." On August 15th, detectives confronted Chris with a failed polygraph test and offered him one last chance to stop lying. Instead, he tried to shift the blame onto Shanann, claiming she had killed the children, a story investigators dismissed instantly. Pressed further, Chris finally cracked and confessed to killing Shanann and disposing of the bodies. But he still hid the truth about what he had done to his daughters. Only later, in a prison interview, would he reveal the full horror of their final moments, and even then, he shifted details, contradicting himself, shaping the narrative to avoid accepting the monstrous reality of his actions. In court, the autopsy results confirmed what Chris refused to say. Shanann had been strangled with enough force to fracture bones in her neck. Celeste showed signs of struggle, and Bella bore the desperate marks of a child trying to survive her father. The nation was horrified, not only by the violence, but by the betrayal. A father willing to kill his daughters for a lover, a husband willing to erase an entire family, to start a new life built entirely on lies. Chris accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, receiving 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, spending the rest of his life in a cell far from the home where his family once lived in innocence. Shanann's parents buried their daughter, their grandchildren, and their unborn grandson with a single inscription carved into the stone above them: together forever. And in a prison hundreds of miles away, Chris Watts sits alone, forced to spend every remaining day with a truth no lie can ever bury. For more true crime stories like this, follow True 10, the darkest cases told in full.